Good morning, everyone. It's good to have you all with us today. We are going to hear from my good friend, a fellow lawyer named Phil Smith, and he's going to talk about some interesting things in his professional life. Again, we're happy that you all are here. Phil is a lawyer. He and I went to law school together. He's a great friend, a person of integrity, a wonderful lawyer. We've collaborated on cases before. But one of the interesting things about Phil is that he served as a state legislator during a different time, perhaps. He was a Democrat, and he's going to tell us a little bit about that experience as well as whatever he wants to talk about. He's from Louisiana, Missouri, and he started a small town practice there, which I think every lawyer dreams about doing, perhaps. And then Mr. Smith went off to Jefferson City. So, Phil, it's good to have you with us.
Thank you,
We
Richard.
appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And before we begin with something solemn, tell us a joke, maybe a pastor joke.
Oh, okay. Well, there's a story about little Johnny and his father who were leaving church one day. And the preacher was standing at the door greeting people as they were leaving. And when little Johnny got up to the preacher, he said, "Preacher, when I get older, I'm going to give you a lot of money." The preacher said, "Well, that's very nice of you, Johnny. Why would you do that?" He said, "Because my daddy says you're the poorest preacher we've ever had." Now, I'm sure that doesn't apply to Kevin.
Well, it's a good message, as Kevin said, for stewardship as we're seeking to raise pledges for next year. So I encourage you all to do that.
Great.
So, Phil, tell us how you got into politics, please.
Well, I'm a lifelong Democrat. Some people call me a yellow dog Democrat, which, as you know, means if there was a yellow dog on the ticket and he was a Democrat, I would vote for him. So I got to be, I don't know, in my 40s, and I thought I could do a better job than the person who had been there for a long time. And so I decided to run against him. And he, as I said, had been a long-term Democrat in the House of Representatives, Missouri House of Representatives. So I got into the race, and another guy got into the race, so there were three of us running in the Democratic primary. And I was successful in defeating both of those people and got elected to state representative from, at that time, it was the 16th Circuit. It was later the 11th Circuit. And now I don't know what the number is. They've changed it since then. Of course, they change it every 10 years when the census is taken. So I got into it there, and
Excuse me, what was the
sure.
geographical area that was your district?
It was like the heart of Pike and Lincoln County. Pike County is about 80 miles north of here, right on the Mississippi River, and Lincoln County is just south of Pike, and it also borders on the Mississippi River, and it goes east, or west, I'm sorry.
So how did that election turn out? I assume it was a primary, and whoever wins the primary
It was.
is going to win the general.
At that time, it was a Democratic district, and if you won the Democratic primary, you were pretty well assured of being elected. I did have Republican opponents, and I was fortunate enough to beat them. But I was pretty green when I started running for office. The office paid, I think, $32,000 a year, and I spent about $20,000 on my own money to campaign on. And if I'd known the ropes, I would have loaned it to my campaign rather than to give it to my campaign. So I never got that money back, but that doesn't matter. It's just that I didn't know then what I knew later on how you should do it.
So was it a positive experience overall for you?
Oh yeah, I wouldn't take love or money for that experience. I was elected in 1990. Term limits came in 1994, so I spent 12 years in the legislature instead of 8 years, which is what term limits does in this day and age. And I think, in my personal opinion, term limits is one of the worst things that ever happened to Missouri, because people get into office and then they think, "Oh my God, I've only got 7 years to go," and they start either looking for a job or trying to find a profession that's better than the one that they came from. Most people think that the legislature is full of lawyers, and that's not the case. I think there's 163 representatives, and when I was there, I think there were maybe 20 lawyers out of that 163. And I have to say, it's an advantage to be a lawyer in the legislature because you understand what you're talking about and what you're passing, what it'll do on the other end of it when it comes out of the chute. And the story is, I came to the floor one day and a person who I think he was an insurance agent, but I'm not sure. I don't know. Anyway, he came up to me and he said, Phil, you're a lawyer. What's pre-jury? I said, pre-jury? What are you talking about? He said, well, here, look at this is the word. I said, well, that's perjury. It's not pre-jury. It's not pre-jury. So it helps if you have a legal background, can read the language, and understand what it does. So.
And how did you happen to run for office in that particular district?
Well, of course, that's where I lived, and it was right in the heart of the district. At that time, where I lived, I had a larger part of the population. It doesn't anymore. Lincoln County does now, because of people who move out of St. Charles or St. Louis and come up into what they consider the country. So Lincoln County is very, very populated now. Pike County is not.
Have the politics of that district changed of late?
Completely.
How so?
Completely. When I was in office and until about 6 or 7 years ago, the courthouse in Pike County, the office holders were Democratic. Now they're all Republican. So it's the nature of the area has completely changed.
So as a civic lesson, are you prepared to tell us and recall how a bill becomes law in the legislature?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking that because, and I'm not criticizing people, it's just that people don't have the time to devote to pay attention to it. You know, I can't tell you how many times people came up to me and said, how are things in Washington, D.C.? And I said, no, I'm in Jefferson City. And then, the session only runs from the first Wednesday after the first Monday in January to the second Friday in May. So the rest of the time I was home practicing law. And the session usually starts on a Monday afternoon about 4 o'clock. We usually adjourn by noon on Thursday, and so I was able to go into the office on Monday morning and do some work, and then I would get back to the office maybe by 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Thursday, do a little work, and then work Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, and then start over again.
This was the law office
The law
in
office
Louisiana.
In Louisiana, yes, I'm sorry. And I had a title company too, and so try to go along with business during that time.
I assume you had a lot of good people helping you?
I did.
I remember Ruth.
Ruth, right. Ruth was with me for probably 30 years. She's in bad health now, but that's another thing. So I did have good help. Because she had been with me for so long, she kind of knew what I would want to do if something came in while I was there.
So tell us about the process of a bill.
Yes.
And feel free to illustrate if you're so inclined.
I will. And I'm talking from terms of the rules as I knew them at the time I was in the legislature. They change from time to time, and the Republican legislature has changed them quite a bit, I understand, but I don't know that. But the process started when you file a bill, and you can either file it by yourself or you could file it with co-sponsors. And a lot of times I didn't ask other people to co-sponsor a bill. It was just easier for me to have the bill drawn up. And you have a legislative department that helps you do the bill in the language that needs to be done for the legislature. And then you sign it and you file it. So I thought I would illustrate for you. Let's say that I filed, let's say House Bill, let's say 80. Another civic lessons, which is probably more than you want to know, but the first 25 bills of the session, the numbers are reserved for the budget bills. So House Bill 1 through 25 are budget bills. The next year, House Bills 1001 through 1025 are budget bills. But anyway, let's say I file House Bill 80, and let's say you're lucky enough to get the speaker who controls the flow of legislation, assign it to a committee. The committee looks at the bill and they decide they want to change it in some way. So it then becomes House Committee Substitute for House Bill 80. So you get it out of the committee, hopefully. You get it on the calendar of the House, and then maybe you reach the point where it's debated on the floor. So then maybe the House doesn't like everything in it, so then it becomes House Substitute for House Committee Substitute for House Bill 80. So if you're looking online and you see all these letters and then the number of the bill, that's what's happening to it. So
And it can be changed as it goes along.
Correct. It can be amended in the committee. It can be amended on the floor of the House. And a lot of the fights in courts, as you know, Richard, come later when they say, well, you've changed the subject of the bill from the title of the bill. That's a whole nother legal thing, as you know. So let's say it goes to the Senate, and it goes to the Senate committee. And let's say they don't like some of it, so they change it. So then it becomes Senate Committee Substitute for House Substitute for House Committee Substitute for House Bill 80. So you keep adding things to it along here, and sometimes it gets more burdensome. So then it gets out of committee and it goes to the floor of the Senate, and they want to add to it. So then it becomes Senate Substitute for Senate Committee Substitute for House Substitute for House Committee Substitute for House Bill 80. So all along this, if you're following a bill, you have to keep following it through both houses to make certain that you understand what's happening to it all along. So you can't play the game unless you know the rules. And when I first went to the House, I sat next to a guy who'd been there for a while, and he said, you will learn more by sitting here listening to the debate than you will if you're back in your office trying to read legislation or trying to read the rules. You'll learn the rules by listening to the debate. And he was correct. And so,
where would lobbyists come into this outline of the various stages of a bill becoming law?
many times the original bill originates with a lobbyist who comes to a legislator and says, you know, we in our, let's say he represents an industry of some kind or something, and we want to do something or other. A good illustration of this is that when I first got there, a lawyer back in Pike County had a friend who was a lobbyist, and he was lobbyist for the podiatrists. And he came to me and he said, and we developed a relationship because he was a lawyer, I was a lawyer. He said, we have a problem in podiatry we want to get rid of. Can you help us? And I said, sure, I'll try. Well, the problem was at that time, podiatrists were known as chiropodists. And they didn't like that term. They sounded like all they did was cut toenails. So they wanted to change it to podiatrist. So I filed a bill that changed their name in all the statutes in Missouri from chiropodist to podiatrist. And I was fortunate enough to get that passed. So later he came to me in a year or two and said, well, the podiatrists are upset that all they can do is treat the foot. They want to be able to treat the ankle also, which became a real fight with orthopedic surgeons. So I filed a bill that would allow them to treat the foot and just above the ankle. So that was pretty hard to get passed because of the opposition from the orthopedic people, but it did become law, and now they, since the 90s, can treat the foot and the ankle, or up a little above the ankle. Gotcha. So that's an example of how lobbyists come to you with legislation. then you have to decide whether or not, you know, you like it or not. Obviously, that didn't have a whole lot to do with my legislative area, but it did affect people who went to podiatrists, and I thought, well, I can handle that, so we did it.
I'll let you sit down now, but let me ask this. When a bill is passed by the House and a bill is passed by the Senate, and they differ significantly or otherwise, how is that reconciled in the legislative process?
Well, there's a committee, a joint committee appointed that has senators and House members on it, and they try to come up with a compromise. And if they do, then the compromise has to go back to the House and to the Senate to be passed by both chambers.
So let's talk about something that's very important to the political process and helping people get elected, and that is money.
Yes.
How did you raise funds in order to finance your campaign?
Well, as I said, the first time I pretty much ran on my own money, but after I won the primary, then people, especially lobbying groups, are more liable to give you money. But I had at least 2 fundraisers every year. One was a golf tournament, which was a lot of fun, and lobbyists love to play golf because they can get out of their office and come and play golf and then take the rest of the day off. So they would pay to play golf. And then in the fall, that was in the spring, and then in the fall I would have a dinner at which local people usually attended much better than they did a golf tournament, obviously. So between those two, and then donations from people and donations from lobbying groups, then you raise the money. It's very sad that I was running for a position that paid $32,000, $33,000. I think maybe by the time I was out of office, it maybe paid $34,000 a year, but I spent upwards of $60,000 to $70,000 in every campaign to be reelected. You do a lot of mailings. That's very expensive. You have to do the printing and the postage, and then the correlating of the addresses on the pieces of mail. And then you do some radio. I did more radio than a lot of people because people in rural areas listen to the radio a lot. And then you do some newspaper. And so with the combination of all those things, it costs a lot of money to run for office.
If you had a case that was pending in court, and there was a trial during the time that you were in the legislature, how did you reconcile, or how did you schedule that and handle that?
Well, most judges were pretty good about understanding, and they would not set it during the legislature time. But there is a provision in the law that allows for a legislative continuance, and you can file that, and usually a judge grants it. And I'll tell you a little bit of a story. When I was first elected to the legislature, one of my primary goals was to separate the judicial circuit where I lived and worked. The judicial circuit then was the 11th Judicial Circuit, and included St. Charles, Lincoln, and Pike County. Well, St. Charles was very, very populous, so they got most of the case settings, and the 3 judges that were our circuit judges, and that came between St. Charles, Lincoln, and Pike. All their settings, most of their settings were in St. Charles, so we got very few trial settings. So one of my first goals was to separate the circuit, make St. Charles its own circuit, and create a new circuit for Pike and Lincoln County. So that was the first bill I filed, and it was passed, but as an amendment onto a Senate bill that Senate bill was trying to get a new circuit judge down in South Missouri somewhere. So I piggybacked onto that. But the funny part of the story is that when I had a hearing on it, it was before a committee chaired by Ronnie White, who's now a federal judge. He was on the Supreme Court of Missouri. He's now a federal judge. And so our judge from the 11th Circuit, his name was Don Dalton, came to testify against my bill because at that time they being the circuit judges got most of their Democratic votes from Pike and Lincoln County, so they didn't want to split off. So he was opposed to the bill. So he came and he came up to testify against the bill, and Ronnie or Judge White said to him, "Judge, aren't you from St. Charles County?" And Judge Dalton said, "Yes, I am." And Ronnie said, "I think you're the guy who made me come out and argue my motion for legislative continuance. I had to come all the way from St. Louis out to St. Charles." And of course, Judge Dalton then was very apologetic for having done that, but my bill passed out of that committee just because of that.
What goes around comes around in politics, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So you decided at some point in your life to go to law school.
Right.
At that point in time, were you a carefree fraternity guy about to graduate from undergraduate school and then go on to law school?
No, I was married and I was working in a bank in my hometown in Louisiana, Missouri, and then I decided to go to law school. So I applied to the University of Missouri Law School and was fortunate enough to get in.
How did you make ends meet while you were going to law school?
Well, fortunately, my wife was a registered nurse, and she worked at the University Medical Center, and we were able to make ends meet that way.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
God bless wives, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's why I know Richard is one of the smartest lawyers around, because he married Betty.
You bet.
Betty was the best legal decision he ever made.
I like that. I would agree, especially now that I'm on camera. But in any event, tell us a little bit about your practice. What type of matters did you handle?
Yeah. In a rural area, you sort of have you have a general practice. You can't really specialize in anything. But because of my background in banking, when I came back to the area, I was able to represent the bank on some legal matters. But I did some domestic relations, a lot of estate and probate planning, and then of course with my title company I did a lot of real estate. At the time I started practicing law, you read abstracts of title, which most lawyers don't even know what that is anymore, but it was a document that was about that thick, and it went back to the time that the land was titled in somebody's name from the government land grant and came forward, and so you could read that chain of title all the way to the present, and then you gave a title opinion to the lender that the land was free and clear and they could make a loan on it. So that was part of it, and you did some traffic tickets. I happen to represent a lot of different municipalities. I was the city attorney for Louisiana, Missouri, Clarksville, Missouri, Eola, Missouri, Curryville, Missouri, a lot of different little towns. So I did all that. Now when I was elected to the legislature, I had to give those representations of the cities up. So.
Did you have a hard contested election ever during your time, other than maybe the initial one?
Yes, as the district changed, the Republicans who ran against me became stronger. So yeah, there were plenty of those. I ran one time uncontested. That's the best way to run. You don't have any money. You don't have to spend much money. But I went ahead and spent monies on getting out the vote, reminding people to vote and exercise their franchise. So, but yes, as the district changed, the elections changed.
Who were the governors during the times that you were in the House?
Yeah, when I first got into the House in 1990, Ashcroft was the governor, and then Carnahan was elected, and then after Carnahan, of course, Roger Wilson filled in after Carnahan was killed, and then Bob Holden, and I think that did it.
And tell me of those governors, tell me the things that you liked about each one of them.
Well, of course, to me, during all that time, Carnahan was the best of all those.
How so, Phil?
He was very attuned to the needs of people. He was very interested in education. During that time, we passed a bill that nobody thought, or it was his bill, obviously, but it was raising the taxes for education. And nobody thought he could do that, and he was able to do that. He was a very mild-mannered guy, very unassuming. I'll tell you a little story. I guess it was 2000, yeah, when he was running for Senate against
Jerry Litton?
No. Ashcroft. Yeah, it was against Ashcroft. I passed a bill on juvenile law, and he wanted to do what they call a fly around, to do ceremonial signings of the bill. So the state had a plane at that time. I think they've now sold them all. But so we flew to Springfield, St. Louis, ended up in Kansas City, and someone wanted to give him a fundraiser at that time. So the state plane flew back to Jeff City, and his son flew up from Versailles, where they had their plane, or his plane, and picked us up, and we flew back from Kansas City to Jeff City. During that flight, he said to me, Phil, you know, I'm leaving the greatest job in the world. He said, if you're governor, the people furnish you a place to live, the governor's mansion. They furnish your food. He said I don't know if he called them trustees, but people from the prison who shine your shoes and clean your clothes and cook your meals. He said it's the greatest job in the world. And he said, if I win Senate, I'll just be one of 100 people. But he said, this is the greatest job in the world. And this plane that we flew from Kansas City to Jeff City in was his son's plane. And it was the plane that he and his son were killed in October of that year in that storm, which was very, very tragic for Missouri. Very tragic.
I mentioned the name Jerry Litton. He was another senatorial candidate, I think, who was killed in an airplane crash.
Correct.
Yeah.
But I think that was maybe in the 80s.
Yeah, I stand corrected.
Yeah. He was a great candidate too. A wonderful speaker.
So tell us about the loyal opposition when you were a House representative, the Republicans. Is that a different era than it is now, for example?
Yeah. Well, I think so. Of course, I was not in the House after the Republicans took over, and are still taking over. And unfortunately, I think because Amendment 3 was adopted by the vote the other day, they will continue to be in control, because that takes us back to allowing politics to decide the districts, as opposed to what it was supposed to be under the amendment that we passed the year before that would have made it nonpartisan. But anyway, at that time, I thought we got along pretty well. They obviously were always upset that their legislation wasn't going anywhere, but most of them were smart enough to know that they could find a bill that was going to pass, and they would come to you and say, well, I've got this bill, I'd like to amend it onto your bill. Do you have any objection to that? And you could object, and you could probably get the amendment defeated. But if you liked it and you thought it helped your bill, well, you took it. It was fine. Yes, it was a different age. I don't think there's that rapport anymore between the legislators.
You remember when Danforth and Eagleton were our senators?
Yes.
And that goes back a ways. But those two were giants, but so the stories go. They got along well, they worked together. Right. And we had a lot of seniority and all of those sorts of things. Never again.
No, it's gone. I compare it, Richard, to the court system. I think when you and I first started practicing law, I think there was a lot more respect in the court system for the system and for the judges and the people involved in it.
So now in your career, you're back in Louisiana, your hometown.
Correct.
You were excited about that, I presume?
I was excited. My parents lived there, and so we came back. I started practicing with Ed Glenn. His name was Ed Glenn, and that was in 72. We had a little baby boy who was 2 or 3, and so it was a good time. Unfortunately, Mr. Glenn became ill, and he died in 1978. So I went on with the practice of law in that office by myself for many years. And
Did you try cases from time to time?
from time to time, you know, in the rural areas, we don't try as many cases as you do down here in the city, simply because people out in the country don't have the money to go to court that much. But we did try cases from time to time. Very few criminal cases. I didn't do hardly any criminal law because we don't have professional criminals out there who steal to pay their lawyers. So they couldn't pay their lawyers. They usually made public defenders help them, and which is a good thing, really, because they needed it. But yeah, we tried cases from time to time.
Now, in the circuit court where you were, the judges have opponents oftentimes, so it's a contested election. Is that correct?
Correct. Many times judges, other lawyers will run against the judge, but a lot of the times if a judge is elected, then they just stay there till they retire.
Were you ever put in the awkward position of having to support one lawyer running for a judge versus another?
I don't remember a case like that, Richard, but no, I don't remember that case like that.
And so that system differs from what we have in St. Louis County and the City of St. Louis Circuit Court.
Correct. You have a system where you're chosen, you're supposed to be non-political, bipartisan commission or something that chooses somebody, recommends them to the governor, and the governor appoints them. That's not what we have in the country. It's you pick a party, you run on a party ticket, and you're elected to circuit judge or associate circuit judge, which used to be the old magistrate judge.
And in the city and county of St. Louis, then, once a judge is appointed, he or she just runs against themselves, if you will, and the voters are asked whether to retain that particular judge.
Correct. Yeah.
Which is supposed to take the money out of the system and things of that nature.
The truth is, I don't remember any judge ever being not retained. That do you?
One.
One, really?
And he was really, really bad and deserved it, and the voters got it right, but
It's difficult.
it is indeed. Now, the Missouri Bar will rate judges, and they do a pretty candid job about that based upon surveying the lawyers, so it's better.
But unfortunately, I don't think anybody but other lawyers read that kind of stuff, and it doesn't. The general public doesn't see that and doesn't read that.
I think you're right.
And just as on at the federal level, the ABA rates people, and they've rated people really, really bad, and they still get chosen to be on the bench.
Did you, when you were a state legislature, chair any committees?
Yeah, I did. I chaired the House Science and Technology Committee.
That sounds important.
Well, it sounds that way, but it didn't get a whole lot of legislation. It did get a controversial piece of legislation on abortion, and of course, at that time, Democrats were in charge, and that piece of legislation died. It also got a health care bill that didn't make it all the way through, but there was a big fight over it. Senator Banks, you remember Jet Banks? He was from the city of St. Louis. He had an insurance bill, and the House had an insurance bill. And of course, he wanted his, and we got in a big fight about it, and the bill was put in my committee, and I was going to hold a hearing on it, and he didn't want to have the hearing, and I said, well, Senator, we either have the hearing or the bill dies. Well, we waited about 30 minutes, and he finally showed up, and we had the hearing. But and then I used to have bills with a senator from the other side of the state, Harold Caskey, who was legally blind, but he was a genius. Someone you could read him a bill and he would remember every line of it, and he could debate a bill on the floor of the Senate with anybody because he remembered everything in the bill almost line by line and could out-debate people. And there's a famous story about he got into a battle with a lobbyist, and the lobbyist decided that he better go apologize to the senator. And so he went in and he said, "Senator, I just want to apologize." Well, Senator Caskey started ranting and raving at him and saying, "You're no good, don't ever come in my office anymore." And the lobbyist got so upset he fainted and fell at the feet of the senator, and the senator went on raving against him because he couldn't see that the guy fainted and fell. And he said, Senator, the guy fainted, he's on the floor." He said, "I don't care, take him out of here." So there's all kinds of famous stories about that.
I remember when Jet Banks had a criminal case, and he showed up to argue on behalf of the defendant in a pink sport coat. And of course, that made the experience memorable for the jurors, and he was very, very successful as a criminal defense lawyer.
Yeah.
And a pretty flamboyant state senator. A lot of power.
Very flamboyant, a lot of power. He was the floor leader in the Senate for years. And on the last day of the session, he would famously come out with toy guns strapped to around his waist. And I'm not sure what that was supposed to represent, but that was his flamboyance for that day, usually in a white suit.
Ah,
yeah.
I'm not surprised. So when you and I met here today and you drove up, I happened to see your license plate. What's the number?
That number is 501.
How did that come about?
Well, the truth is, any number from 1 to 1,000 has to be awarded by the governor's office. So before I got out of office, I got that number from Governor Holden. He allowed me to have that number. So if you see a number below 1,000, then you know that person that was or is politically connected and has that number.
I got you.
Yeah. So.
Well, it's well deserved in this case, for sure.
Well, thank you very much.
So, did you retain your connection with the bank?
Oh, yeah. It's kind of a funny story. I worked there for a year and then went to law school and then came back, as we talked about, to Louisiana. Practiced with Mr. Glenn, who was on the bank board. And when he died in 1978, they asked if I would like to take his place. And I said, certainly. So I've been on that bank board since 1978, continue to be on it. So 30-some years I've been on that bank board. So I think it's kind of ironic that I worked at the bank and now I'm on the bank board and have been for many, many years. And it's a pleasure. It's a great little bank up in the country. It's still family owned. It was owned by a man and his son, and they both passed away, and now their 3 daughters own it. One lives in California, one lives in Colorado, and one lives in Louisiana, and is active in the bank.
I'm sure they're happy to have your counsel and advice.
Well, from longevity, yes.
Comes experience, that's for sure.
Exactly.
Our time is about up, Phil. I want to thank you very much for being here today. On behalf of Parkway Church, we're grateful for your wisdom, your common sense, your experience. If you had to do it over again, would you?
Yes, I wouldn't do it today because it's a totally different atmosphere. But yes, if it was still like it was, I would do it over again. I greatly enjoyed it. And they say anywhere two or more people are gathered, a politician will speak. And so we have 3 here, and so I've been speaking.
You've done well. We appreciate it very much.
I haven't gone on too long. And then,
when you think about it, Phil, just think, you ran your own business. You were a small businessman. You didn't have to worry about somebody firing you. You made your own decisions. Granted, there are negatives to that, but that's an unbelievable blessing. No transfer out of the state, move your family.
No. Yeah, I was very fortunate to have that type of business, to own another small business, which was my title company. And it was a great experience. I mean, as you know, at times when you practice the law, it's stressful, but it was worth it.
And we'll end on that note. Again, many thanks, my friend. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Richard.